So will we become a nation of prisoners when all prisons are privatized and pushing for more prisoners? The Wall Street Journal did a fascinating article about privatization a couple of days ago. Let's see, what was the date of this thing? August 23rd, actually, Monday. And they start out by talking about cities and states across the nation are selling and leasing everything from airports to zoos, a fire sale that could help plug budget holes now, but worsen their financial woes over the long term. Keep in mind, this is from Rupert Murdoch's very conservative Wall Street Journal. Front page story. California is looking to shed state office buildings. Milwaukee's proposed selling its water supply. In Chicago and New Haven, Connecticut, parking meters. Louisiana and Georgia airports are up for grab. 35 deals are in the pipeline in the U.S. right now, according to the Royal Bank of Scotland, with a market value of $45 billion, up tenfold from just 2 years ago. Chicago, for example, they know, was the first city they received, or was the city that received $116 billion in 2008 to allow a consortium led by Morgan Stanley to run more than 36,000 parking meters for spaces over a 75-year period. The investors get the revenue, which this year will be more than $20 million. And after the deal, this I'm quoting from the Wall Street Journal. After the deal, some drivers complain about price increases as well as meter malfunctions. Quote, based on the new rate, the Inspector General claimed the city was shortchanged by about $1 billion. A spokeswoman for Morgan Stanley declined to comment, but Scott Wogskabak, an alderman who voted against the lease, said, quote, the investors will make their money back in 20 years, and we're stuck for 50 years paying, with these meters, paying $0. But the corporate private investors making a fortune. It's also happening in the prison industry, in California in particular. With us to talk about this is Leonard Gilroy. He's the Director of Government Reform at the Reason Foundation, the conservative think tank and magazine Reason.org. And he's also the editor of the annual Privatization Report, which looks at privatization trends at all levels of government. Leonard, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Thom, for having me. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate your coming on. I don't understand how. I perfectly understand privatizing things like General Motors. I don't think anybody in this country really believes that the United States government should be in the business of making cars. Maybe over the short term to keep a company from, to keep a million jobs from going away, but over the long term, no, we need to reprivatize General Motors. But why privatize prisons, for example? We have more people in prison in the United States than any other nation in the world, both in per capita terms and in absolute numbers. And one of the most aggressive lobbies out there for stricter laws that increase the rates of imprisonment is the private prison industry.
Well, Thom, there's a lot in there, so let me just pull some pieces apart. First of all, I mean, you just said something about an aggressive lobby, and when you actually look out there, the private prison companies represent less than 10% of the prison population in the U.S., or they cover, less than 10%.
No, but they represented almost 100% of the lobbying effort in California for the three strikes and you're out law in terms of, representing prisons.
Actually, if you look out there at what the public sector, public safety unions are giving to these debates, what you'd find is that they're spending vastly larger sums to enact the same kinds of laws. And I think, both of us would probably agree on, one issue here, which is, I think lots of people out there would say that we should be sending less people to jail, and we should definitely be looking at sentencing reform and drug policy reform. That's something that Reason Foundation has been very vocal on. Sure. But when you get down to it, you ask the question of why are states and local governments and the federal government using private prisons. And the simple fact of the matter is that two things. I mean, you have fiscal constraints that are really squeezing these budgets, and policymakers are having to make difficult trade-offs between education, Medicaid programs, corrections, for example. In California, it was brought out earlier this year that they're spending more now on corrections than they are on higher ed, and that for a lot of people in California that seems off balance. And but at the end of the day, the private sector is out there delivering services at a lower cost under government regulation through partnerships with these governments.
But it's not at a lower cost. It's not at a lower cost. You did this study, your Reason HJTA study, and you're saying that California is spending $162 per prisoner per diem, which is the highest in the nation. But this is based on data from the American Correctional Association, and you don't mention that the ACA is a private, self-regulated regulated organization composed of former and current correction officials. They receive revenue from private prison companies. You don't mention the fact that privately run prisons don't house maximum security California prisoners, which are more expensive, don't house death row prisoners, which are very expensive, don't house female prisoners, which are more expensive, don't house juveniles or prisoners with serious mental health or physical ailment conditions, which are very expensive, and that there's a cap of $2,500 per prisoner per year on all the health expenses that the private prison company has to pay. And you've got a large prison population with HIV, AIDS, and other serious diseases. TB is also running rampant in our prisons. And all of that, even in the private prisons, is being paid for by the public. And so, of course, on paper it looks good, but the reality is that if you're going to have a corporation where your CEO is going to make a pile of money, where you're going to make enough money that you can spin off money to your stockholders, where you're going to make money that you can pay your senior executives, you've got marketing expenses, you've got lobbying expenses, that is absolutely going to cost more than a government organization where you've got a bunch of basically green eye shaded bureaucrats making middle salaries and having a decent pension.
Yeah, except that you're missing a couple of points there. In California, prison guards are making on average about $73,000 a year plus, benefits. And
would you do that job for anything less?
Well, what I'm saying is that California is spending 3 times the amount on per person or per inmate than Texas, and I think about double Florida. Which is, these are staggering numbers. In California, just like every other part of state government, the public employees unions have for years ruled the roost there and have been able to, basically extend the spending without demonstrating any measurable results.
Wait a minute, let me get this right. We're talking Leonard Gilroy with the Reason Foundation, reason.org. You're saying that the prisons in Texas, which are notorious for violence against inmates, for horrific conditions, god-awful horrific conditions, where they pay their prison guards less than in the state of California, that somehow that we should all sink to the level of Texas?
No, what I'm saying is that if you look out there, California stands nearly on its own in terms of the excess in spending that they're doing in corrections. And if you look at it, over the last 10 years, the corrections budget in California has doubled. And,
a lot of that tracks back to California being one of the few states that has a 3 strikes and you're out law. California has a lot of people in jail who you and I would agree should not be in jail.
I'm entirely with you on that. And if you read that report that you mentioned of ours, we talk about the potential use of private prisons throughout California, but we also complement that with, you can't just look at this as a, privatization issue. You have larger systemic issues.
Of course you do, but the fundamental issue is, why would we ever want there to be a private, for-profit prison industry where you've got an industry whose main profit is made by making sure that people like you and me end up there?
The private prison industry doesn't control who goes to prisons. That's policy decision.
They lobby Congress. They lobby state legislators. They're lobbying the California Assembly as you and I speak, and you know it.
What I can say is, I hear a lot about lobbying, and it seems to me to be really much of a canard. Unions representing government, prison, correctional officers give vastly larger sums to politicians,
and for that they get what? Good pensions.
Well, and also they're looking for.
I mean, that's that great pay that you're complaining about. That's what they're lobbying for.
And they're pricing themselves out of the market. I mean, that is the reality today. And if you look at California, the prison system is a disaster. I mean, right now, the whole correctional health care system is under federal receivership, under a court order. The Fed basically...
Yeah, because the state in general has run out of money. But, okay, Leonard Gilroy, you can read all about it over at reason.org. Leonard, I respect your point of view, even though I disagree with it. Thanks for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
For more on this and other topics, please visit thomhartmann.com.